We don't have a lot of time, so I do want to take it to the audience, so I would encourage you, if you have questions, to come up. And in the meanwhile, I have a question for the group. Maybe start with Jamie and Carla. At Emblematic, you do a lot of CG, and some of these images still seem kind of blocky, and where is that going, and how does that play in with Frontline? Because I don't know how comfortable you are using CG as opposed to video.
So we are actually in the midst of our first project, and this is definitely an issue that we were grappling with as well. And I think there are advancements in the technology. I mean, as Jamie said, that was like the prehistoric era when they did the Hunger one, and the technology has come so far. So like 8i, for example, which allows you to have a bunch of cameras capture an actual person that you are interviewing in a 3D form, allows you to use the actual person as opposed to do an avatar version of them. So that's something that we are really keen to pursue, because again, when you've got these animated characters, so an issue that would come up for Frontline, and again for our standards, and we have like long established standards on our website, and we've been doing visual, again, documentary for many, many years, and so this is not new actually for VR. We've grappled with many of these issues before, but something like ascribing emotion, as you were alluding to, is a line that we might have to draw if we don't have the goods to be able to verify. Or it's the same thing, that guesswork you were talking about. We do a lot of homework, reporting homework and investigative legwork. If we don't have what it takes to say, this is how they moved over here, then we'd have to draw the line. But this new technology like 8i might change it for us.
Yeah, I agree with Carla, and we're really excited to be able to start making these kinds of situations that now look as real as if you had photographed it, still photographed it or videotaped it. I would just to be devil's advocate for a second, though, I don't think the fact that what we've done so far and some stuff that we may continue to do is made kind of invalid or irrelevant because the aesthetic or photoreal quality of the environment is lacking somehow. We're all sort of assuming that VR is sort of a version of video, right? And it falls into that kind of genre of story. Or maybe it isn't. Maybe it's a kind of infographic, right? Think about this. So I remember discussing this with my boss at the time, Graydon Carter, at Vanity Fair. It must have been 4 or 5 years ago, about the single greatest pieces of media we'd seen that year. And one of them was the account in the New York Times of the escape by David Rhodey, who had been their Afghanistan correspondent and had been kidnapped by the Taliban. And he eventually escaped from this compound where they'd moved him to Pakistan. And it was an incredible, and this is like old school newspaper reporting at its best, right? And the story was so good, they serialized it. It was over the course of a week. It was a big story every day, and I couldn't wait every day to open my New York Times and read the next chapter of the story. And it was like a classic Hollywood heist, right? They were in this compound. He was with 2 other prisoners. They figured out how to get a piece of rope from somewhere. They made their own rope ladder in secret. They had to wait for like a 30-second period when the light was off, and they ran across and put this rope down. So, all great. But the 3rd day in, they did this fantastic video graphic, which showed you the dimensions of the compound, right? The physics of it and the geometry of it. And that was like, yes, right? You just get it suddenly in this different visceral way. So it's a very, very long-winded, so I'm sorry, of saying that even though this volumetric piece we put you in might not look real, being able to just illustrate to you the dimensions and the spatial orientation of everything can still be a super powerful thing.
Just to say one thing about the ability, I'm sorry, we just say one thing about the ability to recreate things as if they actually happened. There are all sorts of moments, for example, the contact of some sort between Donald Trump's campaign manager and the person at that rally that could be retold in different ways with VR, all of which will look like they're the real video of what happened when they may not be. I think we will wind up in a situation soon where we will see all over our social networks 4 or 5 different versions of what happened, which will all look absolutely photographically authentic. And that is why I think it's so important for journalists to build strong VR brands so that people know that when I see 4 different versions of what happened, I need to look for a certain brand or organization. Because otherwise, unless we do that, if they think that even known brands are sort of making things up, there'll be a real problem in knowing what's true after a while.
So I think those are all really good points, and obviously we all want everything to look as realistic as possible. But I think it's important to remember that, remember in the trough of disillusionment, things went back in the research labs. There's loads and loads of research out there in VR from research labs over the last 20 years. And one particular thing that people should be aware of is that researchers know that this sense of presence, that when you say, like, I feel like I'm there, when you have an avatar or something that is reflective of reality and it's moving, that you react, your lizard brain in some way reacts more strongly to realistic movement than it does to quality graphics. So I think a lot of this actually is kind of the genius of what you all are doing at Emblematic and kind of prototyped. Having very high quality motion capture is pretty critical, and that if you get that right, then people will really they're going to forget very quickly that man who fell and went into the diabetic coma, looks kind of hokey. You forget about it, trust me. Once you're in that, you have that realistic movement.
Yeah, and I would add to what you were showing earlier, Jamie, that there are situations sometimes you just don't have a choice. You're not there. I mean, I remember just having been an interactive news designer for many years, having to sort of recreate 9/11 and the towers coming down and how that happened. And also remember, Tom, with you, when bin Laden was captured, and a lot of news organizations did a reenactment of how he was captured, but of course none of us really know what happened.
Right, it was fantasy. It was a made-up movie about how it might have happened.
Although some people did it very responsibly, but yes. So this isn't a new question, I suppose, and I think you're spot on to point out that maybe VR is an information graphic sometimes. Now, we have some of the world's top VR journalism people here. Now, this is your opportunity to ask them questions. You got a few more minutes. I think, do we have a question here? Come on over.
Hi, I'm Crystal. I'm a first-year journalism student here at UT. Art B. Brenner's my professor. In the terms of the effectiveness of virtual reality, how do you think it will be distributed to the masses considering it's expensive? Do you think the fact that it's limited to few individuals change how the story is told and the timeliness, since it does have to be relevant for a long time, considering it takes a while to make the virtual reality?
Well, I'll start back on that. So I would go back to Dan's initial slide where you think about these stages. When I first put on a virtual reality headset, it was when I was at Stanford in 2010, and it wasn't quite as archaic as what you saw, but it was pretty close. And when I asked them how much does it cost, the last thing that flashed through my head was, oh, this is going to be great for mass media. That was not that long ago. And look at where we are in terms of both price of headsets, the fact that Google Cardboard distributed by the New York Times. So if we've come that far and that fast, think of where we're going to go. And I think just like everything else we're discovering in journalism, the mindset of a journalist now is what best serves the story, how do you balance quality and time, what's the best delivery platform, and you make those smart, informed decisions.
Okay, great. Does that answer your question? And I think we have another question.
Hi, Eleanor Holmes. I work at the CBS affiliate in San Antonio. I'm a producer. I wonder what you think, if any, VR's place in local news will be. It looks as though these are really good for nice produced kind of headline stories, documentaries, things like that. Obviously, the shooting of you showed the Michael Brown and then Trayvon Martin. Those were local news at some point, but became bigger, and there was time to kind of produce it. Do you think it could be something that we could implement on the kind of hyper-local level?
I mean, shooting these videos is going to become easier and easier, so yes. There's a camera out there, I don't recommend using it just yet, but it's called the Ricoh Theta S that is like maybe like $280. It has 2 half-spherical lenses on it, and it gets, I think, 1080p video. And so for something that is really, it can fit in your pocket, by the way, it's smaller than your phone. For something that's really, timely, if the quality is not as important as kind of just getting, the story out there, and if a reporter happens to be there, then I think that's what we're going to see. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's even just little add-ons to phones, and if there may be, special 360, video capture phones coming out. So we'll see a lot. This is very compelling content right now because Facebook now, even without VR, supports 360 video and YouTube. And I think that we'll get to a point where people are going to expect, even just in a browser, to be able to click around. It'll be kind of like when you see, kids going up to monitors and trying to swipe, and it doesn't swipe. We might actually all see video that way at some point. And
yeah. And it's not only going to become easily accessible and usable by local news producers. It's also going to become available for citizen journalists. And not just with 360 video. At CES in January of this year, Qualcomm demonstrated chips that will be in consumer phones by the second half of this year that will allow you to do a 3D scan of a room like this, for example, with your phone. So, citizen journalists will be able to make volumetric VR in the not too very far distant future. So, the bigger question to me, honestly, is not, when will smaller scale news outfits be able to use it? It's like, where's the bar going to be? But we're going to go through the same evolution as we have done with YouTube in terms of where does professionally produced video sit alongside, what do you call them now? We don't say amateurs anymore. But, user-generated video. The same exact situation is going to happen with VR. So the bigger question is, is there sort of a difference? I'm going to walk off the cliff right now. Okay, so bear with me. So there's a great story in the New York Times Sunday Magazine today by Clive Thompson on Minecraft. You all know what Minecraft is, right? This collaborative computer game. He paints a very compelling picture for this incredibly powerful community of people who are sort of building essentially alternate universes, right? And sharing them with each other and figuring out issues of governance as to how they sort of control and allow access to these environments. It's going to be like this, that they're going to be doing that in VR, right? I mean, I actually think we're about to enter the metaverse, and I say that with a straight face, right? That it'll become a daily.
There's some people who are already in it, actually.
Well, yeah, well, and I think no, it will become a daily habit, certainly for that community, and then spreading of like putting on the headset and going into this other space, which will become essentially a reflection, but as an alternate reflection of the real world, right? Google. Okay, any news story you see now anywhere, right? You can plug in a Google map, and it's helpful. It gives you a sense of what the geography is. So Google Street View is going to go into VR. It's already going into VR, right? So we're pretty soon going to have a sort of a VR virtual version of the entire planet, right? So, yeah.
Then what's real, and what do you report on that? It's just people hanging out in the metaverse. If things happen. I mean, this actually started happening in Second Life. Does anyone remember Second Life, right? The people who started Second Life are actually working on things in VR to create what you're talking about.
Third Life.
Yeah, I don't think they have a name yet. But, it begs the question of, okay, in Second Life, there were cases where people would create their little islands and then, vagabonds would come in and like mess things up. Yeah. And there were protests and everything. And that, for a short period, that was still sort of news, right? The fact that people would come and protest something and then, damage, they were virtual spaces, but they're still real. I'll never forget when so a lot of the people, of course, using Minecraft, including who are coding in Minecraft, are like 9 years old. One of them is one of my kids. And a girl, by the way, so this stuff is very gender neutral. And I'll never forget the moment we were all like, waiting for dinner, and she's on the computer, and then she logs into her to some Minecraft server that she'd visited, and she'd created this beautiful creation. It looked like something from Rivendell in Lord of the Rings. I mean, it was just like gorgeous, and she showed it to me the day before, and then she was in tears because somebody had come in and done what's called griefed it, which means they came and kind of knocked it all over, and that was like real to her. So I think with that generation, we're going to see, a big difference.
So, okay, the bigger, we can talk about how to do 360 video, how expensive it is to make volumetric, blah, 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 right? The bigger question is, how is that generation going to get their news? That's like the big, long-term issue facing all of us in this room. It's a totally different paradigm. Yeah.
Sir.
Thank you. Actually, during these 2 days, I have got the impression that everybody is talking that variety of news organizations in the United States kind of struggle. Printed versions are going low, interactivity is needed. Aren't you afraid that after all, newsrooms, judging the complexity of the VR and the ethical issues, will kind of let it go, and the real gain at the end of the day will be like for companies like BuzzFeed and other entertainment stuff. But again, it will not be the solution for the serious and meaningful journalism.
Well, yeah. Well, I think it's a very fair question. I think the question now is whether VR is going to be used where it really makes sense instead of just because we can do it, and what kind of serious standards we're going to put around it. And everyone gets, a free year or two to play around with it. I mean, that's understandable. But, what we do from now on in the next couple of years will determine that, what kind of credibility it's going to have.
And can I say also, it's not just about the caliber of it, but it's about where it lives too. So some of these kids, I mean, millennials right now get their news oftentimes on Facebook, and there's an algorithm behind that. There is a machine that says what gets viewed and what doesn't, and with YouTube to some degree too, and our videos are on Facebook. But I think there's a larger issue too with just distribution. As these networks, collapse, and as these big mega platforms have put so much money into making what's happening today happen, do they have control over the kinds of stories that are actually going to be seen?
I will be really, really quick. I'm a storyteller from Ukraine. Hi. Thanks for the great session. I just want to ask, when we had the same thing going on, user-generated content in my country, we had a lot of legal aspects of connecting to this issue. Can I ask you how you will work with this in general? Because when a journalist is doing this, it's basically that journalist has a mandate to do that in a way. But when a another person would be doing that, it will face some legal problems.
I can address at least some legal issues. So I try to bring these up in my class too, so that students who are going through, with 360 video in particular, are aware that there's an area of law called unintentional capture, where even just with a regular phone or a camera, if you take a picture of something and then you capture something that you didn't intend to, but which violates some privacy, someone's reasonable expectation of privacy, you still get sued and you still lose. So what happens now when the camera's looking everywhere? So you think your attention is focused here, but something happens back here, right? What happens when you put the 360 camera on a drone, which we've had students do, and it's flying up here? Well, even with a regular 2D, like 2D camera on a drone, this is an issue to be aware of. You see into someone's backyard, there's something that you capture. It could even just be a kid's birthday party. You get sued, you lose, because they would expect it to be private. But what if it's the entire neighborhood? Because it will be. So that's kind of just one example. Another that I'll bring up, and I'm curious to hear what others are talking about, is as we start doing more 3D model capturing. All right, so I could go up to you today and I could 3D scan you, and I could 3D scan parts of this building and recreate it and publish it. It turns out that if you were to 3D capture certain buildings, the architectural diagrams for those and the models are copyrighted. You can get sued for that if you're not careful. So it's like all these things you wouldn't think of that come up to be aware of, which isn't to say you shouldn't try, but there are some issues, new ones.
Fun times ahead.
Nice job, everyone.